Chapter 7. Professional Complications. The river path curved gently as Eleanor and Leo continued their walk, dogs trotting ahead with the synchronicity of old friends. The morning had warmed considerably, sunlight dappling through new spring leaves and casting shifting patterns on the packed dirt beneath their feet.
So the cafe's just around this bend. Fair warning. The owner is something of a character.
Define character.
Former Broadway dancer who gave it all up to pursue her true passion for espresso and unnecessarily elaborate scone flavors.
Such as?
Last week was lavender lemon cardamom. The week before was chocolate cayenne cherry. She claims the alliteration is accidental.
Eleanor found herself smiling, the expression coming more easily than it had in months. There was something undeniably pleasant about walking beside Leo in the morning light, their conversation flowing with none of the careful calculation she usually brought to social interactions.
Sounds adventurous.
That's one word for it. Apollo refuses anything but the plain ones. Discerning canine palate.
As they rounded the bend, a small structure came into view, more permanent than a kiosk, but smaller than a proper cafe. Its wooden exterior had been painted a cheerful turquoise, with a striped awning extending over a handful of outdoor tables. Despite the early hour, several were already occupied by people reading newspapers or tapping on laptops. A small chalkboard sign announced the day's specials in elaborate script. Sunday Splendor, blackberry basil brie scones, and single origin Sumatra.
The alliteration epidemic continues.
They approached the counter, where a petite woman with a silver pixie cut was steaming milk with dramatic flair. Her movements were precise yet theatrical, as if each latte were the culmination of a carefully choreographed performance.
Leo Bennett and Apollo the Magnificent.
Her voice carried the resonant quality of someone accustomed to projecting to the back row.
Your usual? And who is this lovely lady and her dashing companion?
Diane, this is Eleanor Washington and Peanut. Eleanor, meet Diane Montgomery, former Martha Graham dancer and current caffeine alchemist.
Charmed, darling. Any friend of Leo's is a friend of mine, unless you prefer tea, in which case I'll have to reevaluate the entire relationship. Coffee, thankfully. Black. A purist, I approve.
She turned to Peanut, who was watching the proceedings with unusual focus.
And what would the distinguished gentleman like? We have plain dog biscuits for discerning palate.
Leo ordered their coffees while Eleanor found a small table beneath a maple tree just beginning to leaf out. The dogs settled at their feet, Peanut immediately rolling onto his back in a patch of sunlight, while Apollo maintained a more dignified, seated position.
Apollo's monitoring the squirrel situation. Very dedicated security detail.
Eleanor followed his gaze to where a gray squirrel was performing acrobatics along a nearby branch, just visible enough to tantalize but too high to reach.
Peanut's approach to security is more along the play dead until the threat passes philosophy.
Complementary strategies, tactical versatility.
Diane arrived with their order, setting down 2 ceramic mugs and a small plate bearing scones in an improbable shade of purple.
On the house for Apollo's new friends.
She winked at Eleanor.
Anyone who gets Leo out of that bookstore on a Sunday morning deserves complimentary pastry. Oh, we just ran into each other on the path. It wasn't... Of course, darling. Completely serendipitous, I'm sure.
Her tone made it clear she believed no such thing. Before Eleanor could correct this assumption, Diane had swept away to deal with a new customer.
She seems...
Theatrical? Interventionist? Constitutionally incapable of believing any encounter is truly coincidental?
I was going to say perceptive.
That too.
Eleanor took a sip of her coffee, closing her eyes briefly at the rich complexity of the flavor. When she opened them, Leo was watching her with a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth.
What?
Nothing. Just appreciating someone who knows how to properly experience coffee. Most people gulp it like fuel rather than actually tasting it.
Eleanor felt a flush of warmth that had nothing to do with the hot beverage. The way Leo noticed things, small moments, subtle reactions, was both disconcerting and oddly flattering. When was the last time someone had paid such careful attention to her as a person rather than as a professional entity?
The coffee at Williams & Reed was terrible, burnt and bitter. I kept thinking about that during the interview.
Corporate coffee crimes. Very telling about company culture.
You think coffee quality correlates with workplace environment?
Absolutely. Show me a place with good coffee. I'll show you an organization that values the human experience.
He broke off a piece of scone, considering it with exaggerated seriousness.
Conversely, bad coffee suggests a disconnect between management and basic quality of life concerns.
The observation struck Eleanor as both whimsical and strangely insightful. She thought of Hargrove's executive lounge with its professional-grade espresso machine, reserved exclusively for partners while associates made do with the burnt sludge from the break room's ancient percolator. The hierarchy of refreshment had been yet another reminder of one's place in the firm's pecking order.
Hargrove had dual coffee systems. Good for partners, awful for everyone else.
Case in point, telling metric of institutional values.
Eleanor sampled the unusual scone, surprised by the harmonious balance of flavors. Like much about this morning, it defied her expectations in pleasant ways.
Speaking of corporate culture, you never finished telling me about your transition from finance to bookselling.
It's not a particularly dramatic story. I left the firm, took some time to figure out what might actually make me happy rather than just successful, and eventually opened Cornerstone.
That's the condensed version. I'm curious about the full narrative.
She surprised herself with her directness, with the genuine interest behind the question.
What made you choose books specifically?
Leo's expression shifted, becoming more thoughtful as he gazed past her toward the river.
My grandfather owned a small bookshop in the town where I grew up. I spent most of my childhood there, especially after my parents divorced. It was this magical space where adults treated me like my thoughts mattered, where I could disappear into other worlds when this one got too complicated.
That sounds lovely.
It was. And when I was trying to figure out what to do after leaving finance, I kept coming back to that feeling. The sense of a space that existed somehow adjacent to regular life, where time moved differently.
The description resonated with Eleanor's own experience at Cornerstone. That sense of stepping sideways from her usual reality into something with different rules, different rhythms.
What about you? Why law?
That's easy. My father,
Following in paternal footsteps?
in a way, though not exactly as he'd planned.
How so?
Eleanor rarely discussed her career choice in personal terms. The professional narrative was polished, ready for interviews and networking events. She valued intellectual challenge, strategic thinking, the satisfaction of solving complex problems. But the true origins of her legal ambitions were more complicated, rooted in a relationship as formative as it was sometimes frustrating.
My father had very specific ideas about success. Law was acceptable, but only certain types. Corporate, tax, estate planning, areas with prestige and financial stability. Definitely not criminal defense or public interest work, which he considered glorified charity.
And you initially agreed with his assessment?
I wanted his approval. And the stability those paths offered was genuinely appealing to me. But I also...
She hesitated, tracing the rim of her coffee mug with one finger.
I also applied to the public defender's office after law school. Got the position, too.
But you didn't take it.
No. My father had some convincing arguments about student loan debt and career trajectory. And Hargrove made an offer that seemed foolish to refuse.
The memory surfaced with unexpected clarity, sitting in her father's pristine home office as he outlined the practical realities of public service law versus corporate practice. The spreadsheets he'd prepared comparing salary trajectories. The barely concealed disappointment when she'd mentioned the PD offer.
And now you're applying to the public defender again, coming full circle?
More like hedging my bets. The job market is tight.
but part of you is still drawn to that work.
It wasn't a question, and Eleanor found herself grateful for Leo's perception, for his ability to see what lay beneath her practical explanations.
I interned with the PD's office during law school. There was an immediacy to it that corporate law never matched. You could see the actual human impact of your work, for better or worse.
That sounds meaningful.
It was, but also emotionally draining, administratively frustrating, and financially unsustainable given my student loans.
She offered a small smile.
Hence the practical compromise.
The eternal battle between meaning and practicality. I know it well.
A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the occasional sound of other cafe patrons and the distant lapping of the river against its banks. Peanut had maneuvered himself closer to Apollo, the two dogs now lying side by side in a patch of dappled sunlight. The casual intimacy of their posture struck Eleanor as both sweet and vaguely unsettling, as if the dogs had progressed to a level of comfort that she and Leo were still circling.
Did I ever mention how Apollo came into my life?
I don't think so.
It was right after I left the firm. I was still figuring things out, spending a lot of time walking through the city, trying to see it with new eyes. One day I passed this animal shelter, and something made me go in.
His expression softened at the memory.
Apollo was in the last kennel. The volunteer told me he'd been there for months. People thought he was too big, too energetic, too much responsibility.
And you disagreed?
No, she was probably right. He was definitely too much. But there was something about the way he looked at me. This directness, this assessing gaze. Like he was interviewing me for the position of his human.
Eleanor laughed, recognizing that exact quality in Apollo's intelligent blue eyes.
I wasn't planning to adopt a dog. I was living in a small apartment, had no idea what my next career move would be. It made absolutely no practical sense.
His smile widened.
So naturally I filled out the paperwork that same day.
And he's been judging your life choices ever since.
With devastating accuracy.
Something about the story touched Eleanor deeply. The spontaneity of it, yes, but also the willingness to accept responsibility for another living being at a moment of personal uncertainty. When her mother had left Peanut to her, Eleanor had initially seen it as an imposition, another complication in her carefully managed life, not as an opportunity to connect, to care for something beyond herself.
How did you know it would work out? With all that uncertainty in your life?
I didn't. That's the thing about the best decisions. Sometimes you can't spreadsheet your way to them. You just have to make the leap and figure out the landing on the way down.
Before Eleanor could respond, both dogs suddenly leapt to their feet. A squirrel had descended from the higher branches and was now boldly approaching a nearby table, where a muffin sat momentarily unattended. Apollo gave a single authoritative bark, while Peanut launched into full dachshund surveillance mode, body rigid with attention.
Peanut, leave it.
Too late. The dachshund was already in motion, lunging toward the unsuspecting squirrel with surprising speed for his short legs. Apollo, apparently deciding this constituted a security situation requiring backup, followed close behind. The squirrel, belatedly registering the approaching threat, abandoned its pastry ambitions and made a dash for the nearest tree. What followed was a comedy of errors as both dogs changed direction simultaneously, colliding with each other before regrouping and racing after their quarry. Peanut's enthusiasm outstripped his tactical awareness, sending him crashing into a chair leg, while Apollo executed a tight turn that sent him sliding on a patch of decorative gravel.
The coordinated precision of apex predators.
Absolutely lethal.
They were both laughing now, watching as the dogs regrouped for a second attempt. The squirrel, meanwhile, had retreated to the safety of a low branch, where it was now chattering indignantly at its pursuers.
Should we intervene?
Probably, though this might be the most exercise Peanut's had in months.
They rose together, moving to reclaim their wayward pets. Eleanor had just secured Peanut's collar when a voice called from the path.
Bennett, thought I might find you here.
Eleanor turned to see a man approaching, impeccably dressed even for a Sunday morning. Silver hair perfectly styled, his casual attire bearing the unmistakable quality of extreme expense, masquerading as simplicity. Everything about him conveyed the polished confidence of someone accustomed to commanding rooms and closing deals. She felt Leo stiffen beside her, his relaxed demeanor replaced by something more guarded.
Richard, Sunday stroll through neighborhoods you're planning to demolish?
Always with the dramatic framing.
The older man's smile didn't reach his eyes.
I prefer revitalize. Urban renewal. Progress.
His gaze shifted to Eleanor, assessing her with the practiced efficiency of someone who categorized everyone in terms of their utility or obstacle potential.
Richard Kincaid. And you are?
Eleanor Washington.
Washington. Of the Hargrove and Associates Washingtons?
The question caught her off guard. Richard Kincaid clearly moved in circles where law firm affiliations were common knowledge.
Formerly, yes.
Ah, caught in the downsizing, were you? Shame. Morrison speaks highly of their corporate team.
The casual reference to Hargrove's managing partner, the dismissive assessment of her employment status, it all carried the familiar cadence of power acknowledging power, or its absence. Eleanor felt herself reflexively straightening, professional armor sliding into place.
Was there something specific you wanted, Richard? Or just the pleasure of interrupting people's Sunday morning?
Just a friendly reminder that our deadline is approaching. I have investors expecting updates, and I'd prefer to tell them we've reached amicable agreements with all parties.
His tone suggested the alternative would be considerably less amicable.
Thought any more about my offer? Either option?
I've been preoccupied with running an actual business that serves the community rather than destroying it.
Always the idealist. It would be charming if it weren't so impractical.
He glanced at his watch, a subtle gold piece that probably cost more than Eleanor's monthly rent.
I have a brunch meeting, but do think about what I said. The train's leaving the station, Leo. Better to be on it than under it.
With a curt nod to Eleanor and a final meaningful look at Leo, Richard Kincaid turned and walked away, his casual stride carrying the purpose of someone who viewed the world as something to be arranged according to his specifications. A tense silence followed his departure. Eleanor glanced at Leo, noting the tight set of his jaw, the distant focus of his gaze. Apollo pressed against his human's leg, sensing the shift in mood.
Friend of yours?
Former business partner. And no, not for a long time.
What was that about a deadline? And an offer?
Leo sighed, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. For a moment, Eleanor thought he might deflect the question, retreat behind the same conversational barriers she often employed when topics veered too close to personal vulnerability.
It's complicated, and not particularly good coffee conversation.
Try me.
The simple response, offered without pressure or demand, seemed to reach him. Leo gestured back toward their table.
We should probably sit for this, and possibly order something stronger than coffee, though it's a bit early for that.
Once resettled, dogs now calm at their feet, Leo began to explain. The development company formed by his former investment firm. The plans to acquire and demolish the entire block housing Cornerstone Books and the surrounding small businesses. The dual offer to either buy him out at above market rate or return to the firm to help manage the ethical aspects of the development.
He's already acquired most of the properties. The holdouts are me, the flower shop, and the bakery.
And the deadline?
2 weeks from last Tuesday. After that, he's threatened to pursue alternative strategies.
Such as?
He wasn't specific, but Richard has connections throughout the city government. Zoning boards, building inspectors, planning commissions. He's donated to every campaign and sits on half the influential committees.
Eleanor's legal mind immediately began processing the information, analyzing angles and potential vulnerabilities. It was a familiar mode, this problem-solving focus, but the context was entirely different. This wasn't about billable hours or professional advancement. It was about Leo's livelihood, his community, the space he'd created that somehow felt important to her after just a week's acquaintance.
Has anyone researched the historical significance of the buildings? Landmark status could prevent demolition.
Marcus, the florist, has been gathering information, but it's slow going without legal expertise.
What about community activism? Neighborhood associations can be surprisingly effective at delaying development projects.
We've started organizing, but Richard works fast, and he's very good at presenting these projects as neighborhood improvement rather than community destruction.
Eleanor found herself mentally cataloging resources, potential strategies, precedents from similar cases she'd encountered peripherally during her time at Hargrove. The legal part of her brain was fully engaged, mapping approaches with the same focus she'd once applied to protecting corporate interests.
I'm sorry to dump all this on our coffee outing. Not exactly light-hearted Sunday conversation.
No, it's...
She hesitated, surprised by the realization forming.
I could look into this for you. Legally, I mean.
What?
I could research potential approaches, historical preservation claims, zoning challenges, community impact assessment requirements. I'm between positions at the moment, so I have the time.
The offer had materialized before she'd fully considered it, an instinctive extension of help that bypassed her usual careful calculation of professional boundaries and personal involvement. The surprise on Leo's face mirrored her own internal reaction.
That's incredibly generous, but I couldn't ask you to.
You didn't ask. I offered.
She straightened slightly, professional confidence flowing into the uncertainty of personal connection.
Besides, commercial real estate law was one of my specialties at Hargrove. I'd be looking at familiar territory.
What she didn't add, what she was only beginning to acknowledge to herself, was how appealing the prospect felt, using her skills for something beyond corporate advancement, applying her expertise to protect something that mattered on a human scale.
I don't know what to say, except thank you, and that I'd insist on compensating you for your time.
We can figure that out later.
She smiled, a genuine expression that felt like shedding weight.
Consider it pro bono for now. Or payment for dog-sitting services rendered.
Leo studied her face, his expression shifting from surprise to something warmer, more appreciative. Not just of the offer itself, but of the impulse behind it. The recognition seemed to flow between them, an understanding that this gesture represented more than professional courtesy. It was a step across one of the careful boundaries Eleanor had established, a choice to engage more deeply with Leo's world.
In that case, I accept. Though I should warn you that Richard Kincaid isn't accustomed to opposition. He can be ruthless when challenged.
I'm familiar with the type. Corporate law isn't exactly known for its gentle personalities.
A memory flashed. Standing in a conference room at Hargrove, the sole woman among senior partners, holding her ground on a contested provision, while 6 men with decades more experience attempted to steamroll her assessment. The familiar surge of determination, of intellectual challenge embraced rather than avoided.
I'm starting to think Richard might have finally met his match.
The confidence in his voice, the unhesitating faith in her abilities. It triggered a warm flutter beneath Eleanor's ribs that had nothing to do with professional validation and everything to do with the way Leo saw her. Not just her credentials or her potential utility, but something more essential, more personal. Their eyes held for a moment, the connection deepening in ways neither seemed prepared to verbalize. Peanut chose that moment to stretch dramatically, his small body extending to improbable length before he settled again with a contented sigh. Apollo watched this performance with what Eleanor could have sworn was canine amusement.
So,
Leo broke the charged silence, his tone deliberately lighter.
now that I've thoroughly derailed our pleasant morning with real estate drama, should we continue our walk? The path loops back toward the bookstore from here.
Actually, I was thinking...
She hesitated, aware she was about to suggest another deviation from her usual Sunday routine. Another unscheduled element in a weekend already full of them.
Maybe we could stop by your store, if you're heading there anyway. I could get a better sense of the block, the buildings, see what we're working with.
Purely professional reconnaissance, of course.
Exactly. Preliminary case assessment.
Well, far be it from me to impede thorough legal research.
As they gathered their things, thanking Diane for the coffee and collecting their respective dogs, Eleanor found herself replaying her impulsive offer. Using her professional skills to help Leo hadn't been on any agenda, wasn't part of any strategic career advancement plan. It was simply something she wanted to do, a natural extension of the connection that had been building between them. The realization was both unsettling and oddly freeing. For years, she'd approached every decision through the lens of professional calculation. How it would appear on a resume, how it would position her for the next step up the carefully plotted ladder. Even relationships had been assessed for their networking potential or their compatibility with her career trajectory. Yet here she was, volunteering her expertise for a cause with no obvious professional benefit. For a person who represented everything her structured life had been designed to avoid: spontaneity, uncertainty, emotional risk.
Penny for your thoughts? Though given inflation, probably $1 now.
Eleanor glanced up, realizing they'd been walking in silence, her internal contemplation apparently visible in her expression.
Just thinking about how differently this Sunday is unfolding compared to my usual routine.
Regrets?
No.
She answered, surprising herself with the immediacy and certainty of her response.
No regrets.
As they continued along the path, Eleanor found her thoughts drifting to their first meeting at the bookstore. The way Leo had transformed Peanut's chaos into opportunity rather than disaster. The ease with which he'd adapted to the unexpected, finding value in the interruption rather than resistance to it. Perhaps that quality was contagious. Perhaps in small ways, she was learning to see interruptions not as deviations from plan, but as possibilities previously unimagined. To recognize that the map she'd been following with such determination might not be the only valid route through the territory of her life. It was a disquieting thought. And also, increasingly, an exhilarating one. Cornerstone Books wore a different aspect on Sunday morning, closed to customers but still emanating the same welcoming atmosphere that had drawn Eleanor from her first visit. Leo unlocked the front door, Apollo immediately trotting to his customary bed near the register, while Peanut conducted a thorough inspection of the premises, nose twitching at the overnight accumulation of new scents.
Make yourself comfortable. I'm going to grab the property documents from the office. Marcus left everything we've collected so far with me on Friday.
As Leo disappeared into the back room, Eleanor wandered through the now familiar space. Without customers, the store felt more intimate, as if revealing aspects of itself previously hidden beneath the flow of commerce and conversation. Sunlight streamed through the large front windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in golden shafts above the polished wooden floors. She found herself drawn to the personal touches that marked the space as uniquely Leo's: the hand-lettered shelf labels with their unconventional categories, the comfortable reading nooks positioned to catch the best natural light, the carefully curated staff recommendation shelf where each book bore a handwritten note explaining its selection. Eleanor picked up one such volume, opening to the small card tucked inside the cover. Leo's handwriting, slightly angular but clear, filled the space. For when the world feels too loud, and you need to remember the quiet places still exist. This book found me during a moment when I'd forgotten how to listen to anything but urgency. It taught me to hear silence again. The note wasn't signed with his name, just a simple L. As if the recommendation weren't a commercial strategy, but a personal communication between reader and reader. an intimate exchange across the boundaries of time and circumstance.
Found them.
Leo emerged from the office, arms laden with folders and what appeared to be architectural drawings.
It's not as organized as you'd probably prefer, but Marcus is more artist than archivist.
Eleanor quickly replaced the book, feeling oddly as if she'd been caught peeking at something private. Leo began spreading the materials across a reading table near the window, creating ordered piles from the chaotic collection with surprising efficiency.
Property deeds, historical records, previous attempts at landmark designation for the flower shop. It was originally a blacksmith's in the 1890s.
He glanced up at her.
I should mention that while I'd be grateful for any professional insights, I don't expect you to take this on as a full legal project. Even an initial assessment would be helpful.
Let me see what we're working with before making any commitments.
She moved to join him at the table, professional focus engaging as she began examining the documents.
How much do you know about the actual development plan? Specifics, not just general demolition intentions.
Only what Richard has shared publicly, which isn't much. Mixed-use development, luxury residential with curated retail experiences. Whatever that means.
It means overpriced apartments and chain stores that can afford premium leases.
She sifted through the papers, legal mind cataloging potential approaches, angles of attack, vulnerabilities to exploit. This was familiar territory, the analysis of contracts and property rights, the identification of procedural requirements and potential violations. Her fingers traced the property boundaries on a faded map, mentally overlaying zoning restrictions and municipal codes.
You look different. When you're working, there's a focus, an intensity. It's impressive.
Eleanor glanced up, caught off guard by the observation and the appreciation behind it. Most people found her professional intensity intimidating rather than admirable. Her thoroughness had often been labeled as excessive, her attention to detail as obsessive rather than meticulous.
Force of habit. Corporate law trains you to spot weaknesses before they become liabilities.
Or in this case, before they become opportunities.
Exactly.
Their eyes met across the table, a moment of perfect understanding flowing between them. For all their differences in approach and outlook, there was a core of shared comprehension, the recognition of complementary strengths rather than opposing weaknesses. The moment stretched, neither looking away, until a tremendous crash from the back of the store shattered the silence. Both turned toward the sound just as Apollo came trotting into view, looking supremely unconcerned. Of Peanut, there was no sign.
That can't be good.
Where's Peanut?
As if in answer, a plaintive whine emerged from somewhere in the poetry section. They found the dachshund sitting amid a scattered collection of volumes, looking up at them with an expression of complete innocence despite the literary chaos surrounding him.
Let me guess, the mouse.
I am so sorry. He's usually not this...
Enthusiastic about literature? Don't be sorry. The poetry section has needed reorganizing for weeks.
Rather than the irritation Eleanor expected, Leo seemed genuinely amused by the situation. He crouched beside Peanut, examining the disrupted shelving with exaggerated seriousness.
I see you prefer to arrange by color rather than author or theme. Bold choice. Visually striking, if somewhat challenging for the traditionalist browser.
Eleanor knelt to help gather the fallen books, struck once again by Leo's ability to find humor and possibility in what she would normally categorize as disaster. No recrimination, no stress. Just adaptation and forward movement.
I should have been watching him more closely.
Why? He's exploring his environment, making discoveries, creating new organizational paradigms.
Also known as making a mess.
Temporary disarray en route to new arrangements.
As they collected the scattered volumes, their hands occasionally brushed, brief, incidental contacts that nevertheless sent small currents of awareness through Eleanor's system. The proximity in the narrow aisle, the shared task, the comfort of working together without need for constant conversation, It all contributed to a growing sense of ease between them, of connection beyond the boundaries she'd so carefully established.
Looks like Sir Digsby has artistic sensibilities. He's grouped all the romantics together.
Pure coincidence.
I prefer to think he has a preference for Wordsworth. A dachshund drawn to pastoral reflections makes perfect sense.
Eleanor found herself laughing, the sound echoing softly among the shelves. When was the last time she'd approached a mishap with humor rather than frustration? When had she last seen an interruption as an opportunity for connection rather than an obstacle to efficiency? As they restored order to the poetry section, as they returned to the property documents spread across the reading table, as the morning stretched toward afternoon in this unplanned deviation from her usual Sunday, Eleanor felt something shifting within her. A gradual loosening of rigid structures. A willingness to consider that perhaps the unexpected detours might lead to destinations more valuable than those on her carefully plotted map. It was a small shift, subtle, not enough to entirely remake the patterns of a lifetime. But as she worked beside Leo, as she applied her professional expertise to protecting something that mattered to him, Eleanor recognized the first tentative step toward integration rather than compartmentalization, toward seeing her skills not just as tools for career advancement, but as means of connection and contribution. The external problems remained: Richard Kincaid's development plans, her own precarious employment situation, the fundamental differences between her approach to life and Leo's. These were not tensions easily resolved, complications not quickly untangled. But here, in the quiet Sunday stillness of Cornerstone Books, Eleanor found herself less concerned with resolution than with presence. With the simple, unexpected pleasure of bringing her full self, professional skill and personal connection, structured thinking and emotional response, to this particular moment, this specific place, this evolving relationship that defied easy categorization. It wasn't an answer, but perhaps it was the beginning of a better question. Chapter 8: Historical Precedents. Afternoon sunlight slanted through Cornerstone Books' tall windows, transforming the reading table into an island of golden illumination amid the quietude of the closed store. Eleanor sat surrounded by stacks of documents, her laptop open beside her, fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Legal pads covered in her neat handwriting formed concentric circles around her workspace, each page filled with notes, citations, and potential strategies. Leo returned from the back office carrying another folder of documents, pausing briefly to observe Eleanor before she noticed his presence. Her focus was absolute, brow slightly furrowed, lips occasionally forming silent words as she read, hair falling loose from its usual tidy arrangement. In the hours since they'd begun working, she'd transformed the scattered collection of materials into an organized case file, with a thoroughness that was both impressive and slightly intimidating.
More ammunition for the cause.
He placed the folder within her reach.
Property tax records going back to 1975. Marcus is nothing if not thorough in his document hoarding.
Perfect. I need to establish a pattern of continuous use to strengthen the historical designation argument.
She didn't look up as she spoke, her attention already captured by the new materials. Leo smiled, recognizing the single-minded focus of someone completely in their element. It was a different Eleanor than he'd seen before, not the carefully composed professional maintaining boundaries, nor the cautiously relaxing companion from their river walk. This was Eleanor in her natural habitat, all intellectual precision and methodical analysis. The dogs had long since abandoned any pretense of interest in the legal proceedings. Apollo lay stretched across his bed near the register, occasionally sighing dramatically to express his boredom. Peanut had claimed a patch of sunlight near the poetry section, site of his earlier reorganization attempt, where he now snored softly, paws twitching in pursuit of dream squirrels. Leo glanced at his watch. 3:42 p.m. They'd been working for nearly 4 hours straight, Eleanor diving into the material with an intensity that suggested she'd forgotten basic human needs like food and rest. He recognized the state all too well from his finance days, the hyper-focus that could burn through an entire day without registering the passage of time.
I'm going to make some lunch. Any allergies or strong food aversions I should know about?
Eleanor's only response was a distracted, as she compared a property deed with something on her computer screen.
Food, Eleanor. The substance humans require for continued functioning. Ring any bells?
She glanced up briefly, blinking as if emerging from deep water.
Oh, no, I'm fine. Just coffee would be great.
Coffee is not lunch. Even really good coffee, which I do happen to possess.
I can grab something later. This property survey might be the key to establishing the block's historical integrity.
Leo moved closer, standing at the edge of her document archipelago.
The historical buildings will still be historical after you've eaten. Revolutionary concept, I know.
A small smile tugged at the corner of Eleanor's mouth, the first crack in her concentrated facade.
You sound like Maggie. She claims I'd forget to breathe if it weren't an autonomic function.
Smart woman, this Maggie. I'm making soup and sandwiches, non-negotiable.
Fine. But I really do need coffee if I'm going to maintain this pace.
That I can arrange immediately.
Leo headed to the small kitchen tucked behind his office, a space that had once been a storage closet before he'd renovated it to accommodate his coffee habit and occasional need for meals during long inventory days. The professional-grade espresso machine gleamed on the counter, a stark contrast to the otherwise modest appliances surrounding it. He worked with practiced movements, selecting beans from a climate-controlled container, grinding them to precise texture, tamping the grounds with perfect pressure. There was a meditative quality to the process, a focused attention to detail that resonated with the same part of him that had once excelled at complex financial calculations. While the espresso extracted, Leo surveyed the refrigerator's contents. He'd shopped yesterday, anticipating a quiet Sunday of reading and meal prep for the week ahead. Those plans had been pleasantly derailed, but the ingredients remained. Good bread, aged cheddar, heirloom tomatoes, fresh basil from the plant thriving on his windowsill. When he returned to the main room carrying a perfectly crafted latte, Eleanor had migrated to the floor, documents spread around her in what appeared to be chronological order. She looked up as he approached, and the genuine appreciation that spread across her features as he handed her the coffee sent an unexpected warmth through his chest.
This smells amazing.
Italian roast, medium extraction, touch of cinnamon in the foam.
She took a sip, eyes closing briefly as she tasted it.
Oh my God, this is
Life-changing, paradigm-shifting, existentially transformative.
unfairly good.
She took another appreciative sip.
I'm starting to understand your career change better. Anyone who makes coffee like this has clearly found their calling.
Wait until you try the sandwiches. You might suggest I open a cafe.
At this point, I'd believe you capable of anything.
There was a lightness to her tone, a warmth in her eyes as she looked up at him from her position on the floor. The professional intensity remained, but something else had joined it. A comfort in his presence, a willingness to engage beyond the boundaries of their shared task. Leo returned to the kitchen to finish preparing lunch, listening to the occasional rustle of papers and soft muttering from the main room. There was something surprisingly intimate about the domestic sounds of another person working nearby, about the shared purpose that had transformed his usually solitary Sunday. When he emerged with 2 plates, he found Eleanor standing at the window, coffee mug cradled in both hands as she gazed out at the street. Sunlight caught in her hair, illuminating strands of deep amber among the darker brown. She turned at his approach, and something in her expression, a moment of unguarded appreciation, made him momentarily forget what he'd been about to say.
Is that lunch? It looks incredible.
Maple glazed cheddar with heirloom tomato and basil on sourdough. Nothing fancy.
If that's nothing fancy, I can't imagine what you consider elaborate.
They cleared a space at the reading table, Leo carefully moving documents under Eleanor's watchful eye, preserving the organizational system only she fully comprehended. As they ate, Eleanor outlined what she'd discovered so far: potential challenges to the development based on zoning regulations, precedents for historical designations based on cultural significance rather than architectural uniqueness, community impact assessment requirements that might be leveraged to delay proceedings.
You're remarkably good at this.
It's just standard legal analysis.
There's nothing just or standard about it. You've identified more viable approaches in 4 hours than Marcus and I found in 2 weeks.
A faint flush colored Eleanor's cheeks at the direct praise. She took another bite of her sandwich, clearly using the moment to formulate a response that deflected the compliment.
This really is exceptional. The sandwich, I mean.
Deflection noted and allowed, but only because you're helping save my bookstore.
Speaking of which,
she wiped her hands on a napkin and reached for her laptop.
I think our strongest immediate approach is the historical designation angle. If we can prove the block represents significant cultural heritage, we can file for emergency protection while the full application processes.
They fell back into work mode, lunch plates pushed aside as Eleanor walked Leo through the legal strategy taking shape. Her hands moved as she spoke, sketching invisible diagrams in the air, her voice taking on the clear, persuasive cadence that had no doubt served her well in corporate boardrooms. Leo found himself equally captivated by the content of her explanation and the transformation that occurred when Eleanor was fully engaged in her expertise. The careful self-containment that usually characterized her demeanor gave way to something more animated, more present. This was Eleanor without the filters of caution and calculation. Brilliant, focused, and surprisingly passionate about protecting a neighborhood she barely knew.
You would have made a formidable public defender.
The observation slipped out without premeditation. Eleanor paused mid-sentence, surprise flickering across her features.
What makes you say that?
The way you approach this, it's not just technical analysis, though that's impressive enough. There's a conviction behind it. A recognition that legal arguments aren't just abstract exercises, but tools to protect something that matters.
Eleanor looked down at the papers spread before her, as if seeing them differently through his description.
I've rarely had the opportunity to apply my skills this way. Corporate law is more about protection in the negative sense, preventing liability, avoiding risk.
Rather than creating positive change.
Exactly.
Their eyes met across the table, a moment of understanding passing between them. Not just of each other, but of possibilities neither had fully articulated. Eleanor's unrealized professional path, Leo's transition from finance to something more meaningful. The tension that had been building between them all day shifted subtly, becoming something deeper than mere attraction. The moment broke when Apollo stretched dramatically, his tags jingling as he patted over to press his nose against Leo's hand, a clear signal that the dog's patience with this extended work session was wearing thin.
Apparently it's time for the afternoon constitutional. Do you mind if I take them out quickly? 10 minutes, just around the block.
Go ahead. I'll keep working on the community impact assessment requirements.
As Leo leashed both dogs, Eleanor was already reabsorbed in her research, fingers flying across her keyboard with rhythmic precision. He paused at the door, struck by how naturally she had integrated into his space, how the bookstore seemed more complete with her presence among the shelves and reading nooks. The afternoon gradually surrendered to evening, gold giving way to amber, then to the blue-gray twilight that softened the bookstore's interior. Neither had noticed the transition until Leo finally registered the strain in his eyes, as he reviewed property surveys from the 1960s.
We need light.
He rose to switch on the antique floor lamps positioned throughout the store. The warm illumination created pools of light amid lengthening shadows, transforming Cornerstone Books into something more intimate than its daytime incarnation. Eleanor looked up from her computer, blinking as if surfacing from deep underwater. A small furrow had formed between her brows, likely from hours of concentration without proper breaks. She stretched, raising her arms above her head, in a motion that embodied the physical release of mental tension.
What time is it?
Just past 7.
7? That can't be right.
She checked her phone, genuine surprise registering on her face.
We've been at this for 8 hours?
Approximately. Time flies when you're fighting capitalist encroachment.
I should probably get going. Peanut needs his evening walk, and I have...
A schedule to maintain, applications to complete, a carefully structured Monday to prepare for.
The gentle teasing in his tone took any sting from the words. Eleanor's mouth quirked in reluctant acknowledgement.
Something like that.
Or we could order dinner. Continue this momentum, and I'll walk Peanut with Apollo when they need it. You've made incredible progress, but we're just getting to the most promising material.
Eleanor hesitated, clearly weighing competing priorities against the pull of the work before her. Leo could almost see the mental calculation happening, the measurement of scheduled obligations against unexpected opportunity.
I don't want to impose.
Having someone volunteer expert legal assistance is the opposite of imposition. It's practically a miracle.
He softened his voice slightly.
Stay, please. We're on to something important here.
The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, but weighted with consideration. With choice.
I'll need more coffee.
That I can definitely provide, along with actual dinner, not just caffeine.
While Leo prepared another round of espresso, Eleanor reorganized her workspace, consolidating completed research and foregrounding the documents still requiring analysis. The methodical movements revealed her legal training. Efficient, thorough, nothing overlooked or misplaced. Returning with fresh coffee, Leo found her staring intently at her laptop screen, the blue light illuminating her features in the gathering darkness of the store. He placed the mug near her right hand, careful not to disturb the precise arrangement of papers surrounding her.
What are you looking at with such concentration?
Historical property maps of the neighborhood from 1910. I'm trying to determine if any of the original structures were associated with significant historical events or persons.
She didn't look up as she spoke. Her focus, absolute. Leo studied her profile. The slight furrow between her brows, the intent concentration in her eyes, the determined set of her mouth. There was something captivating about her complete immersion in the task, about the seamless integration of remarkable intelligence and genuine commitment.
I'm going to start dinner. Any preferences?
No response. Eleanor had disappeared completely into the depths of historical research.
Eleanor?
Still nothing. With gentle amusement, Leo reached out, lightly touching her shoulder.
Earth to Eleanor.
She startled slightly, looking up with momentary disorientation. His hand remained on her shoulder, the contact brief but electric through the thin fabric of her sweater.
Sorry, what?
Dinner. I'm making it. Preferences or restrictions?
Oh, no, anything is fine.
She seemed suddenly aware of his hand on her shoulder, a flush spreading across her cheeks.
You really don't have to cook. We could order something.
I want to. Cooking helps me think.
He reluctantly removed his hand, the brief connection lingering like an echo.
Besides, I have the ingredients for pasta puttanesca, and it would be a shame to let them go to waste.
If you're sure.
Absolutely sure. Drink your coffee before it gets cold.
She raised the mug to her lips, momentarily closing her eyes in appreciation as she tasted it.
This coffee should be illegal, or at least heavily regulated.
Too much power in private hands?
Exactly. You could overthrow governments with this kind of leverage.
The easy banter felt natural now, the tension between them evolving from cautious distance to something more comfortable yet charged with underlying awareness. As Leo moved toward the kitchen, Eleanor's voice stopped him.
Thank you for everything today. The space to work, the food, the
She gestured vaguely at the organized chaos surrounding her.
support for this slightly obsessive legal deep dive.
Thank you for the slightly obsessive legal deep dive. It means more than I can express.
Their eyes held briefly across the room, an unspoken current passing between them. Then Eleanor turned back to her computer, and Leo continued to the kitchen, each returning to their respective domains while remaining acutely aware of the other's presence. In the small kitchen, Leo fell into the rhythm of cooking, chopping garlic and anchovies, crushing tomatoes, measuring olive oil with practiced precision. The familiar motions grounded him, providing a welcome counterpoint to the increasingly complicated feelings Eleanor's presence evoked. He hadn't planned any of this. The extended collaboration, the shared meals, the gradual dissolution of the careful boundaries Eleanor had established. Yet it felt somehow inevitable, as if the trajectory had been set from that first meeting at the dog park, both of them circling closer despite their apparent differences. When he emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 plates of pasta, the rich aroma of tomatoes, garlic, olives, and capers preceding him, he found Eleanor standing at his "For When Everything Changes" bookshelf. She turned at his approach, something soft and contemplative in her expression.
I'm beginning to understand your categorization system better.
Oh?
It's not about genres or subjects. It's about moments. Human experiences.
The observation, so accurate yet rarely articulated by customers, caught him off guard. Most people found his system quirky but ultimately arbitrary, a bookseller's eccentricity rather than a deliberate curatorial approach.
That's exactly right.
It's brilliant, actually. Connecting books to the specific emotional or psychological states when they're most needed.
Leo placed the plates on a small table near the window, momentarily at a loss for words. Eleanor's perception, her recognition of the intention behind his categorization, it felt unexpectedly intimate, as if she'd glimpsed something essential about him that most missed entirely.
Dinner's ready. Nothing elaborate, but it should provide adequate sustenance for continued legal heroics.
Eleanor joined him at the table, the dogs rousing themselves from their respective naps to investigate the possibility of shared pasta. The rich scent filled the air between them, as Leo poured 2 glasses of mineral water from a bottle he'd retrieved from his office mini-fridge.
This looks amazing. And smells even better.
Family recipe. My grandmother was from Sicily and believed food should announce its presence before it reached the table.
Eleanor took a bite, her expression transforming with surprised appreciation.
This is incredible. Seriously incredible.
The secret is patience. Let the flavors develop properly. Don't rush the process.
Is that your philosophy for everything? Patience and proper development?
There was a teasing quality to her question, but something more serious underneath. A genuine curiosity about his approach to life beyond cooking.
Not everything. Some things require impulse rather than patience. Inspiration rather than development.
He met her eyes across the small table.
Knowing which is which, that's the real challenge.
Something shifted in the air between them, the conversation taking on layers beyond the simple exchange of words. Eleanor held his gaze for a moment before looking down at her plate, that now familiar flush warming her cheeks.
Well, your pasta definitely demonstrates the value of patience.
High praise from someone who expected a sandwich at best.
I've learned not to underestimate you.
Their eyes met again, the simple statement carrying more weight than its casual delivery suggested. The bookstore around them had grown darker beyond their small pool of light, creating the illusion of a world contracted to just this table, this moment, this connection gradually deepening between them. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. The only sounds the occasional clink of forks against plates, and the soft breathing of the dogs settled hopefully beneath the table. When they spoke again, the conversation flowed easily between legal strategies and personal histories, professional challenges and private aspirations. Eleanor described her early fascination with debate club, the thrill of constructing airtight arguments, and the satisfaction of persuading even hostile audiences. Leo shared stories from his bookstore's first struggling year, when he'd sometimes gone days without a single customer, but still felt more fulfilled than during his most lucrative periods in finance.
Weren't you terrified? Starting over completely?
Terrified is an understatement. I'd built my entire identity around financial success, around being the guy who could solve any market problem with enough analysis and strategic thinking.
What changed?
I realized I was asking the wrong questions. Not, how do I succeed, but what constitutes success?
He twirled pasta thoughtfully around his fork.
Once I reframed the question, the answer became clearer. Harder to implement, but clearer to see.
Eleanor nodded slowly, her expression suggesting the words had landed somewhere meaningful.
I've been asking myself similar questions lately. Since Hargrove let me go?
And what answers are emerging?
Still forming, but this
She gestured to the legal materials surrounding them.
feels different than the corporate work I used to do. More directly connected to actual human impact.
Like your work would have been at the public defender's office.
Maybe, though with fewer dramatic courtroom speeches and more mundane research.
The mundane often precedes the dramatic. Foundations before facades.
They finished eating, but neither moved to return to work immediately. The moment felt suspended, wrapped in the intimate quiet of the bookstore after hours, the city beyond the windows settling into its evening rhythm while they remained in this bubble of shared purpose and growing connection. Leo gathered their plates, returning briefly to the kitchen before coming back with 2 small glasses and a bottle of amber liquid.
Digestive, old Italian tradition helps with all that pasta.
What is it?
Amaro, herbal liqueur, complex but not too bitter.
She accepted the small glass, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. The simple contact sent a current of awareness through both of them, neither pulling away quite as quickly as propriety might dictate.
To successful research?
To unexpected collaborations.
They touched glasses, the gentle clink resonating in the quiet space. Eleanor took a small sip, the complex herbal flavors unfolding across her palate.
That's interesting. Good, but definitely complex.
An acquired taste, perhaps, like many of the best things.
Their eyes met over the rims of their glasses, the statement hanging between them with obvious double meaning. Eleanor didn't look away this time, holding his gaze with new steadiness. The moment stretched, elastic with possibility. The spell broke when Eleanor's phone chimed from amid the papers. She glanced at it, then back at Leo with visible reluctance.
I should get back to it. There's still so much ground to cover.
Of course.
They returned to their respective tasks, Eleanor to her legal research, Leo to reviewing architectural documentation Marcus had collected. The comfortable silence that settled between them was punctuated only by the occasional rustle of papers, the soft tap of keyboard keys, and the gentle breathing of the dogs who had long since given up hope for pasta and returned to their naps. An hour passed, then another. Leo periodically refreshed their coffee, quietly placing new mugs within Eleanor's reach without interrupting her concentration. Once, finding her rubbing her neck from prolonged focus, he gently suggested a brief stretch break, which she accepted with surprised gratitude. It was approaching midnight when Eleanor suddenly straightened in her chair, eyes widening as she stared at her laptop screen.
Leo, I think I found something.
He looked up from the maps he'd been studying, immediately alert to the excitement in her voice.
What is it?
Remember how we were looking for historical significance beyond just architectural merit? I think this block might have been the site of the Harbor Street Artists Collective in the 1940s.
The what?
It was a gathering place for avant-garde artists during and after World War II, including several who later became nationally significant. According to this article, they were based in a collection of small commercial buildings on Monroe Street near the old rail junction.
She looked up, eyes bright with discovery.
That's this block.
Are you sure?
Not completely, but look at this photograph from 1946.
She turned her laptop toward him, revealing a black and white image of a street clearly recognizable as their own, though with different storefronts. A group of people stood outside what was now Marcus's flower shop, several holding canvases, others with musical instruments.
That's definitely this block. The architectural details match perfectly.
And these weren't just any artists. Elena Martinez was here, one of the most important Latina painters of the mid-century. And James Wilson Reed, whose jazz compositions eventually influenced the entire bebop movement.
Her words came faster now, excitement building.
This could be exactly what we need. Cultural significance with national implications.
Would that be enough for historical designation?
Combined with the architectural elements we've already documented? Absolutely. Especially if we can find more evidence of the collective's activities here.
She was already typing rapidly, following this new trail with the intensity of a bloodhound on scent. Leo moved to stand behind her, watching over her shoulder as she pulled up additional articles, cross-referencing names and dates against the property records they'd been reviewing all day.
Here. A lease agreement from 1944 signed by Elena Martinez for the building that's now your bookstore. And look at the terms. Significantly below market rate, with a clause specifically permitting artistic and cultural activities including exhibitions and performances.
The landlord was supporting the artists deliberately.
Exactly. And that landlord was Samuel Kincaid.
They both froze, the name hanging in the air between them.
Kincaid as in...
Any relation to your Richard Kincaid?
I think... Yes. His grandfather. Richard mentioned once that his family had owned property in this area for generations.
This is perfect. Not only do we have cultural significance for historical designation, but we have direct evidence that Kincaid's own family supported the very artistic community that gives this block its historical value.
The excitement in her voice, the triumph in her expression. Leo found himself captivated by this version of Eleanor, all professional brilliance and unconcealed enthusiasm. Without thinking, he placed his hands on her shoulders, the contact electric even through the fabric of her sweater.
You're amazing. Do you realize that? Absolutely amazing.
Eleanor looked up at him, their faces suddenly, unexpectedly close. The triumph in her eyes shifted, deepened into something more complex. Awareness, anticipation, decision. For a moment, neither moved, suspended in the recognition of a boundary about to be crossed.
Leo.
His name on her lips was both question and answer. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned down as she tilted her face upward. Their lips met with gentle certainty, the contact sending currents of warmth through both of them. It was a simple kiss, tentative, exploring, brief, yet it contained worlds of potential, of paths diverging from carefully plotted courses. When they separated, Eleanor's eyes remained closed for a moment, as if preserving the sensation before reality could intrude. When she opened them, there was none of the retreat or recalculation he might have expected, only clear-eyed presence, and perhaps a touch of wonder.
That was...
Unexpected?
Actually, no, it felt...
She paused, searching for the right word.
Inevitable.
The simple honesty of her response, free from her usual careful filters, touched something deep in Leo's chest. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, the gesture tender and wondering.
Inevitable. I like that better than unexpected.
Before either could say more, Eleanor's phone chimed insistently from the table. Not a notification this time, but an alarm. She glanced at it, conflict evident in her expression.
It's midnight. I should.
Go home? Return to the scheduled world?
There was no mockery in his question, only gentle understanding. Eleanor nodded, though with visible reluctance.
We both have businesses to run tomorrow. And a historical designation application to prepare if we're going to stop Richard Kincaid.
Always the practical one.
Not always. Not tonight.
The simple statement, weighted with acknowledgement of the shift between them, hung in the air as they gathered their things. Leo collected the sleeping dogs while Eleanor organized her research materials, each movement deliberate yet charged with new awareness of the other. At the door, they paused. The night beyond the bookstore's windows was quiet, the street empty save for pools of lamplight on wet pavement, where a light rain had begun to fall.
I'll walk you home.
You don't have to.
I want to.
She studied his face for a moment, then nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth.
Okay.
As they stepped out into the gentle rain, dogs rousing themselves to sleepy attention, Eleanor surprised Leo by reaching for his hand. Their fingers interlaced with natural ease, palms fitting together as if designed for this specific connection. They walked in comfortable silence through the midnight streets, the soft percussion of rainfall providing a soundtrack to this unexpected detour from the separate paths they'd each been traveling. The future remained uncharted territory. Richard Kincaid's development plans, Eleanor's job search, the fundamental differences in how they approached life. Yet in this moment, those complications receded. What remained was simpler, more essential. Two people discovering connection where they'd least expected it. Two lives temporarily aligned despite the odds. Two paths converging when all logic suggested they should diverge. And the possibility, still fragile but undeniably present, that some detours might lead to destinations more valuable than those on any carefully plotted map.